I had been married to Anna for 6 years. I stayed by her side, never leaving, never giving up. Finally, her new piece, Muse, brought her back to fame, and the genius painter was at the peak of her career once again. A reporter asked her, "Who is the man in the painting?" She smiled gently, "He is the love of my life." That day, I received the divorce papers she had sent me. The genius painter Anna returned with her new masterpiece, Muse, marking her triumphant comeback after years of absence. At the exhibition, all her works were sold at high prices, except for the most eye-catching piece. Muse. It was a lifelike oil painting. Beneath the soft glow of the moon, the surface of the lake shimmered with scattered light. A young man in white stood with the wind in his hair, holding flowers, his smile enchanting beyond words. She said, "This is not for sale, no price can buy it." A reporter asked, "Who is the man in the painting?" She smiled gently, "He is the love of my life." That day, I received the divorce papers she had sent me. The money and the house would go to me. She didn't want a single penny. I watched a live stream of the exhibition online and called her. "Congratulations, the exhibition was a great success." Her tone was indifferent. "It's none of your business." "How is it none of my business?" I raised my voice, questioning her. "Didn't you say you wanted nothing? The exhibition's earnings are marital property, it should be mine too." She scoffed on the other end. "George, you really are only interested in money." I smirked. "Money is more reliable than people." She was silent for a moment. "Tomorrow. I'll have my lawyer send you a new agreement." I readily agreed, "Fine. From now on, it's over between us." Before she could say anything else, I hung up. It felt like every second longer would be a waste. It's hard to imagine, just 4 months ago, I was praying to spend my whole life with her, to grow old together. That day was our 6th wedding anniversary, Valentine's Day. I secretly flew back from France, planning to surprise Anna. As I reached the apartment building, I saw a young man standing alone in the snow, holding his luggage. His hands were red from the cold. But his voice on the phone was cheerful. "Guess where I am?" Whoever was on the other end said something, and the young man's eyes softened, his voice warm. "I missed you, so I came to see you." I remembered back to our college days, when Anna and I were in a long-distance relationship. During moments of longing, we would do the same, buy a ticket and rush to meet each other without hesitation. I was moved by the scene and took out my phone to call Anna. Just then, I saw her coming out of the hallway. She ran straight to the young man and threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly. Like she was the most precious thing in the world. They kissed in the quiet snow, passionately and for a long time. I froze, watching their intense affection. When Anna finally looked up, she saw me standing not far away. I trudged forward with my luggage, each step feeling like miles away. Her first instinct was to step in front of the young man, shielding him. He seemed puzzled and leaned in to whisper in her ear, "Who is he?" For a moment, I didn't know what expression to wear. I stopped in front of them and said quietly, "I'm her husband." The young man immediately stepped in front of Anna, taking a protective stance. "This is my fault. Don't blame her." I laughed bitterly, glancing at the woman behind him, whose face was twisted with conflicting emotions. "Aren't you going to say something?" Anna bit her lip, her gaze hardening, as if she had made a decision. She stepped forward and stood beside the man, taking his hand, their fingers intertwined. She looked at me and said, "This is exactly what you see." Perhaps it was the cold wind and snow, but I felt numb. As if my mind had frozen over. There was no confrontation, no argument. I quietly turned and walked back home. Anna didn't follow. The balcony window was wide open, and the cold wind howled through the room. I could almost imagine Anna receiving the call, opening the window, and seeing the young man standing downstairs, his face lighting up with both surprise and joy. The easel beside her was still set up, and an unfinished painting caught my eye. The subject of the painting was none other than the young man from earlier. He held a bouquet of roses, his clothes billowing in the wind. His face carrying the bashful smile of someone who had just reunited with a lover. Once upon a time, Anna had painted me with that same devotion. We had met when we were both 16, in high school. Back then, she was already well known, a rich girl with all sorts of halos surrounding her. I came from a rural village, so the difference between us was vast. We shouldn't have had anything in common, but fate placed us as desk mates. My foreign language skills were poor. And my English still carried a rural accent. I was often mocked by my classmates. She defended me and patiently helped me. The girl always spoke with a smile, her lips curving just slightly, and when she smiled, it was like 1,000 flowers blooming all at once. I harbored a quiet crush on her for 3 years, never daring to imagine she could like me in return. When the college entrance exams were over, instead of applying to Harvard like everyone expected, she chose the Rhode Island School of Design. She told me that painting had always been her dream. And her family supported her decision. She had the privilege to be impulsive, but I didn't. With my grades at the time, my best option was a school in the South, far away from her. That summer, she came to my small mountain village to gather inspiration and asked me to be her guide. We wandered together, admiring the flowers on the hillside, the birds in the forest, and the clouds in the sky. On the last day, my mother brought out some homemade wine and asked her to try it. I didn't stop her, and after just one glass, she was drunk, unable to tell north from south. She collapsed into my arms. Her face flushed, mumbling drunken words. She said, "George, I like you." As I helped her pack, I discovered that her paintings were filled with images of me. When it was time to leave, I took her to the station. We walked slowly, and I wanted to ask her, "Does what you said last night count?" In the end, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Anna, would it be too late if I confessed now?" She looked at me, tears of joy in her eyes. "It's not too late, as long as it's you. It'll never be too late." And we were together. For 4 years. We maintained a long-distance relationship during college. I gave her all my love and security, making sure she knew, without a doubt, that she was the one I cherished most. She often teased me without restraint, "George, you really love me, don't you?" I indulged her, and when she had finished teasing, I would lower my head and kiss her gently. From 18 to 28, we loved each other for 10 years. Countless yesterdays rushed through my mind. The suppressed emotions finally exploded, and I tore the painting into pieces in a fit of despair. I sat alone on the sofa, waiting for dawn to break. When Anna came back, she carried a strange scent on her, like the fragrance of hotel shower gel. Seeing me, there was a flash of guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. My eyes were bloodshot, and when I spoke, my voice was hoarse. "When did it start?" She was honest about their past. The young man's name was Henry, a senior at the Rhode Island School of Design, studying painting. She had met him last year when she returned to Rhode Island for a school reunion. He admired Anna's talent and was a devoted and passionate admirer. Their souls seemed to connect. Often reminiscing about Van Gogh under the starry sky, and discussing Monet's water lilies by the lake. She said they were rare kindred spirits, and true lovers. We had been together for 10 years, but it couldn't compare to their 10 months. When she spoke about him, her gaze softened, and her expression was tender. She emphasized it several times, "I really love him." I was consumed with jealousy, nearly losing my mind. He's just a college kid. How can he be a good person, interfering with someone's marriage? Isn't it all for money? Anna looked at me. Her eyes slowly growing colder. "George, he's not like you. He doesn't see the world through money." Her words cut deep. Anna was a born romantic, always treating money as if it were dirt. In college, she had already gained some fame as a painter. Many people offered large sums to buy her paintings, but she always refused. Her art was only given to those she felt a special connection with. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. The year she graduated, her family went bankrupt. Her parents were chased by creditors and died in a car accident. She was trapped in her home by the debt collectors. I climbed over the wall to find her and held her, saying, "Anna, marry me." I had no social status, no family fortune, but I had an unwavering heart. I consulted a lawyer and learned that children weren't responsible for their parents' debts. But the creditors were numerous and ruthless, and their endless harassment could ruin Anna's life. With my mother's consent, I withdrew all the savings from our family and gathered enough money to negotiate with the creditors, settling her debts with the least possible cost. After we got married, life was hard. Our rental apartment had leaks, and during storms, it turned into a small pond. In the winter, the wind blew straight through the house, and we couldn't sleep from the cold. We held each other tightly, talking all night long. Anna tried to reach out to those who had once wanted to buy her paintings, but all she got was humiliation. She had been too proud before, and had made enemies. Now, lacking money, she ran into walls everywhere. I felt so sorry for her and didn't let her try selling her paintings again. To make things a bit easier for her, I worked 3 jobs every day. For every $100 I earned, I gave her 99. Once, I suffered from anemia and temporarily lost my vision for a few minutes. She rushed to take care of me, even her voice trembling as she called my name. She cried uncontrollably in front of me, saying, "If I don't marry you, I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but marrying you, I'm dragging you down. And that makes me feel even more hopeless." I scolded her, "Fool, I never thought of you as a burden." At that time, I felt truly happy. "We should get a divorce." Anna's words snapped me back to reality. Her tone was firm. "I'll agree to anything you want." My heart twisted painfully. "You still don't understand what I want?" She didn't seem to get it, simply saying, "You set the conditions." I couldn't help but laugh. "So, you're really willing to give up everything for him?" Anna lowered her eyes and dropped a bombshell. "George. I'm pregnant with his child." My heart shattered into pieces. I thought back to when we also had a child. In our 2nd year of marriage, Anna got pregnant. I was overjoyed. But because of her health, she miscarried. Anna apologized to me over and over, saying, "I'm sorry." I held her tightly, forcing a smile and comforting her. "It's okay, we'll have another child someday." That day, she held me so tightly, whispering into my ear, "I love you." Those words felt like a spell, binding our hearts together during those empty, uncertain days. From then on, I worked even harder. I was good at reading the room, and gradually started making a name for myself in the business world. My boss worked in import, export and often needed to entertain clients. I had a good tolerance for alcohol, so he liked bringing me along, even giving me extra bonuses. Every day, I would come home after drinking so much I could barely stand. Anna would stay by my side all night, taking care of me. She always said, "Don't ruin your health for a little money." I brushed it off. "We need to think long-term." As time passed, I built a lot of connections and eventually started my own wine business. I traveled for work, juggling meetings and social events, overwhelmed by the constant rush. Anna would tell me, "As long as we have enough money, there's no need to push yourself so hard." But I had 2 dreams I felt I had to make come true. I always believed Anna's future would be filled with stars and the sea. I wanted her to paint freely, not having to sacrifice her lifelong passion for the mundane troubles of life. And I also hoped the child we lost would come back to us sooner. Our hard work eventually started to pay off. By our 5th year of marriage, we had a house and some savings. I finally mustered the courage to ask, "Anna, let's have a child." But to my surprise, she wasn't very excited. She simply said, "George, now isn't the right time." She told me she was at a creative block and hadn't produced a painting she was happy with in a long time. I tried to comfort her. "Your paintings are amazing. My friends love them. My boss even said he wants to buy one for his new house next month." Anna sneered. "Those people don't understand art." I was taken aback. Realizing I had said something wrong, she quickly apologized and explained that she didn't look down on business people, she just wanted validation from more serious art critics. She buried her head into my shoulder, softly saying, "I'm just losing confidence." Maybe this was the point where cracks began to form in our relationship. But I was too busy to notice her changing. Soon after, Anna's mood began to improve, and she smiled more often. I thought she had broken through her creative block. But it turned out her soul had found a new place to call home. She had found the young man she loved, full of life and untouched by time. He would compare her paintings to the flowers of spring, the rain of summer, the winds of autumn, and the snow of winter, calling them the most beautiful things in the world. But I, a businessman driven by profit, filled with the stench of money, couldn't resonate with her anymore. "George, I'm sorry," Anna's voice echoed in my ear. I remained silent for a long time, as long as the years we had spent together. Finally, resentment bubbled up. "I'm not divorcing you," I heard myself say. Anna's reply was cold, "You don't get to decide." In that moment, I heard the death of love. When Anna and I were at our worst, my mother fell ill and was hospitalized. The doctor said it was late-stage cancer. My father died young. And my mother had suffered all her life. When I got married, I was too caught up in my own life to pay her much attention. She insisted on living alone in the countryside, not wanting to be a burden on us. Later, when our financial situation improved slightly, I still didn't have the time to be with her. I felt so guilty. I had never given her a single day of happiness. Lying in her hospital bed, looking frail and withered, she asked, "Where's Anna?" I forced a smile and answered cheerfully, "She's been very busy getting ready for an art exhibition." I told her that Anna had gained the attention of the great master of art, Mr. Hurst, and that she was about to make it big. She smiled, looking satisfied. "Anna has finally achieved her dream. Your life will surely get better from now on. I can rest easy now." I made up some excuse and rushed out of the room, my tears flowing uncontrollably. It felt like fate was playing a cruel joke on me. Not long after our argument, Anna received news from France. The reclusive Mr. Hurst had suddenly expressed interest in her work and wanted to meet her. A talented horse finally met its rider. They hit it off immediately, feeling as if they had found each other too late. Anna saw that boy as her lucky star. She said he helped her rediscover her passion for painting, which had led to this opportunity. What she didn't know was that it was I who had worked tirelessly to make that opportunity happen. And now, I was just helping her build someone else's future. I splashed some cold water on my face and went back to the hospital room. My mother suddenly asked to see Anna. I couldn't refuse. Finally, I contacted him. Perhaps it was my pride, but I didn't want to appear weak in front of her, so I spoke in a negotiating tone. "Anna, let's make a deal. I'll agree to the divorce, but you'll help me put on a show." "Okay." She agreed without hesitation. It was the answer I had hoped for, yet my heart twisted in response. Disappointment, anger, sadness, negative emotions felt like a swarm of poisonous insects, devouring me bit by bit. I thought I was probably losing my mind. Anna arrived right on time. After half a month apart, she seemed even more graceful and radiant, clearly living well. We both masked our emotions, pretending to be close, and pushed the door open to enter the hospital room. My mother lay weakly in the bed, but when she saw us, her dull eyes lit up for a moment. She struggled to sit up and spoke to us. She advised me to cherish my wife and never wrong her. Then she told Anna to live a good life with me. My mother had never been very talkative. But this time, when we met, it seemed like she had endless things to say. I knew it was because she was worried. Anna responded to each of her words with a simple, "Okay." In the end, my mother took our hands and placed them together, saying, "Take care of each other in this lifetime." I couldn't stop my eyes from reddening. I really wanted to tell her that if she left, there would be no one left for me in this world. But now, the words were stuck in my throat, and I couldn't say anything. Anna naturally patted my back, her gentle gaze reminding me of the 18-year-old girl from all those years ago. I felt a bit dazed, and as we left the room, our hands remained intertwined. I felt shameful for realizing I was still clinging to the warmth of her touch. Can we not divorce? An absurd thought spiraled in my mind. Suddenly, my phone rang. Anna pulled her hand away from mine. I looked up at her in confusion. And the image of the girl I once knew vanished in an instant. She stepped aside to answer the phone, and bits of conversation drifted into my ears, just casual exchanges. After a moment, I heard her blush and scold softly, "Shameless." Then, in a playful tone, she said, "I'll be home soon." I looked at this woman and suddenly felt like I didn't know her at all. After hanging up, she noticed my dazed expression and furrowed her brow. "You look terrible. Are you sick?" She reached out as if to touch my forehead. But I instinctively pulled away. We both froze for a moment. Her hand lingered in the air, and she awkwardly said, "We can wait to handle the divorce until your mom is feeling better." My foggy mind finally cleared, and I nodded in agreement. My mother's condition did not improve, and her memory began to deteriorate. Every now and then, she would ask to see Anna. For 3 months, Anna had been playing along, listening to my mother's repeated instructions. Every time Anna came to the hospital, Henry would frequently call, and eventually, he started showing up with her. The day they walked in hand, I lost my temper and stood in front of them, "Get him as far away as possible." Anna explained that he would wait outside so my mother wouldn't see him. I refused to compromise. The silent boy suddenly stepped forward, furious, "Aren't you going too far? You two are getting a divorce, stop tormenting everyone." He became increasingly agitated, nearly ready to come to blows with me. "She's been too busy preparing for her art show to even eat, I'm just here to look after her." Anna took his hand, soothing him gently. "Don't be angry, you'll scare our child." Henry shot me a glare before looking down at her, "But I'm worried about you." Their display of affection made my stomach churn. I sneered, "We're not divorced yet, do you know that being together now is cheating? Or are you renting Anna, paying for her? Anna froze, her eyes welling up. George, have you lost your mind? Henry gritted his teeth, glaring at me. How can you speak like that? No wonder Anna doesn't want you. I'm done with this. She has to choose, leave with me today or stay with you. Then, he turned to look at the woman beside him. His gaze earnest. There was no suspense. Anna, hand in hand with her lover, walked away. That day, my mother seemed to be in good spirits. I lied, saying Anna had an emergency and couldn't make it, and she didn't ask further. But by evening, my mother suddenly went unconscious, and the doctor issued a critical condition notice. When she regained consciousness, she asked to see Anna again. Panicking, I called Anna, but she didn't answer for a long time. I crouched on the floor, holding my head, and asked, "Can you come over?" She simply replied, "It's too late." I was frantic. "My mom is dying." Her tone became impatient. "I suggest you stop making jokes like this." I was both shocked and angry. "Do you think I'd joke about my mom's life?" She was silent for a while before saying, "It's raining tonight, I'm pregnant, and he won't let me go out." I threw my pride aside, nearly begging, "Let him drive you, or I'll have a friend come pick you up. I'll guarantee your safety, okay? 10 years of love, please help me just this last time." She sighed, "I'll discuss it with him." I clung to the faint hope, rambling, "Can we call today my mistake? If you come tonight, I'll agree to anything you want. Please." The lightning and thunder outside covered the sound of my broken self-esteem. A low, muffled voice came from the phone, tinged with some kind of desire. Anna let out an awkward hum, then scolded softly, "Stop messing around." The phone hung up. When I tried calling again, no one picked up. That night, she never showed up. My mother noticed something was off and carefully asked, "Have you and Anna been arguing?" I forced a light tone, "No, she's on her way." Her brow furrowed tighter and tighter. She told me to call her, wanting to speak to Anna. But the phone was off. Later, my mother's awareness gradually faded, and she kept mumbling, "George, if you're not happy, how can I rest in peace?" In the early morning, she passed away, her hand tightly gripping mine, her eyes refusing to close. My world crumbled into ruins. I brought my mother's ashes back to our hometown for burial, and Anna came along. She hung her head, her face full of guilt. "I'm sorry, I didn't know that night, your mom really." I asked her to step outside, my voice weary. "Don't call her the mom. You're not worthy. George. Can't you speak properly?" Anna's voice softened. "I just wanted to come and see if there's anything I can help with." I kept a cold face, "No need." She refused to leave, following me around. The funeral wasn't a grand affair. I only had a few neighbors help out. Once everything was over and everyone had left, I finally calmed down and said to Anna, "We need to talk." She nodded. I spoke coldly, "Let's get the divorce papers done quickly." She frowned and changed the subject. "I want to explain what happened that night." "I don't want to hear it." I interrupted her, continuing, "You're the one at fault. I don't want you taking a single penny. I know exactly what assets we have, so don't try anything tricky. Don't come to me with conditions, or I'll expose your dirty little secrets to everyone." Anna's eyes were filled with sorrow. "George, the assets at home are yours to begin with. Do you really think I would fight you for them?" I sneered, "You can't always judge a person by their face." Her expression showed disappointment. "You weren't like this before. People change," I said. The Anna I knew before would never have treated me like this. Long silence was broken by the ringing of my phone. It was Henry calling. She stepped outside to answer it. I shut the door behind me, and she didn't come back. That night, I lay in the bed of my old house and had a long dream. I dreamt of myself at 22, recklessly bringing Anna home and telling my mother I was going to marry her. Our creditors followed me to the house, shouting and making noise every day. My mother hid her in the room, advising, "Anna, don't go out. Leave everything to George." I faced them alone for months, finally getting everything settled before Christmas. That day, snow fell as I dragged my exhausted body back from another city. Snowflakes piled up on me, layer after layer. But I didn't feel cold. When I got home, she was the first to open the door and rush out, throwing herself into my arms. I staggered a couple of steps but still managed to catch her tightly. "I never want to be apart from you again," Anna cried and laughed, looking so cute. Just as I was about to respond, the scene spun wildly. I stood frozen, watching her, in the snow, fall into someone else's arms and kiss him passionately. Anna. Anna. I kept calling her name, but she couldn't hear me. Suddenly, everything went black, and I felt a strong sense of weightlessness, as if I were falling endlessly into an abyss. The next day, I woke up with a high fever, my mind clouded. I lay in bed for 2 days, feeling like I was on the brink of death. One day, I got a message from a business partner. There was a problem with the wine supply, and I lost a large sum of money. I sat up in shock, quickly dressing and heading out. Then, I went to the doctor, took medicine, and eventually recovered. These 4 months drained too much of my energy. There were several mishaps in my business, and I was so busy that I didn't even have time to feel sad. The next time I heard Anna's name, it was because of her newfound fame at her art exhibition. The ever-demanding master of the art world, Mr. Hearst, highly praised her, saying she had been a hidden gem for years. Even the reclusive Mr. Hearst, who had long withdrawn from the public eye, appeared at the exhibition in person and publicly stated that Anna was the most talented young female artist he had ever seen. The industry was shaken. Media rushed to cover the news, and online reports flooded the internet. With her striking appearance, she quickly surpassed even celebrity stars in attention. The hashtag #GeniusArtistAnna hashtag shot to the top of the trending list. All of her work sold out instantly, and there were even offers to buy her most talked-about piece, Muse, for $10 million. Anna rejected the offer. When a reporter asked her about the man in her painting, she openly declared her love. Marcus, my university roommate, forwarded me a video of this moment, asking, how could Anna say that? I, holding the divorce papers I had just received, replied, it's nothing. She's fallen for someone else, and we're getting a divorce. Marcus immediately called, furious, wasn't everything fine just 4 months ago? Doesn't she know what you went through for her in France? I answered flatly, even if she knew, it wouldn't change anything. On our 6th wedding anniversary, I wanted to give Anna a special gift. I knew her greatest idol was a painter named Mr. Hearst. Mr. Hearst had rarely appeared in public in his younger years, and now he had withdrawn completely, almost impossible to find. Through all my connections, I managed to get a lead. Someone had seen him wandering the streets of the Marais district in Paris. So, I used a business trip as an excuse and went to France alone. It was my first time abroad, and I was unfamiliar with everything. On the very first day, my luggage was stolen. I tried to chase the thief but was led into a narrow alley. There, I was surrounded by a group of street thugs. Outnumbered, they pinned me to the ground and beat me. Just before I lost consciousness, I heard someone shout something in French, and the group quickly fled. I woke up in the hospital, only suffering some superficial injuries, and Marcus was the one who saved me. We were university roommates. After I got married, he moved to France, and we lost touch. I never expected to reunite with him like this. He helped me a lot, staying by my side during my recovery, and asked, aren't you going to tell Anna? I shook my head. During that time, Anna often locked herself in her studio, seeming to be in a very critical phase of her work. I didn't want to make her worry. Once I felt a little better, I rushed out every day, heading straight to the Marais district. The truth was, I wasn't sure I'd find Mr. Hearst, but I wasn't willing to give up any possibility. When Marcus found out the real reason for my trip, his eyes widened in disbelief, and he looked at me like I was crazy. Then, he exaggeratedly mocked me, you're spoiling Anna too much. One day, she'll ruin you. I shot him a glare, I don't mind. We wrestled around playfully. Just like we did back in university. In the Marais district, I struck a deal with a street vendor to rent his painting stall, displaying several pieces of Anna's work from different stages of her career in the most prominent spots, praying every day for Lady Luck to shine upon me. It was winter, and aside from sleeping, I spent the rest of the time out in the cold streets, my ears becoming frostbitten. Marcus would often buy me medicine while complaining, you're just asking for trouble. After 3 weeks in France, with Valentine's Day approaching, I decided it was time to head home. This trip was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and it wasn't surprising that I couldn't find anyone. I figured I would wait until I had more concrete news and try again later. But then, just as I was packing up to leave, the unexpected happened. Mr. Hearst appeared and immediately took a liking to one of Anna's works from when she was 18. He smiled and asked me who the creator of this painting was. Proudly, I told him Anna's name. He pointed to the "Not for Sale" tag on the side of the painting and asked, "Not for sale?" I nodded. This is a personal treasure of mine. Then why put it out there? I said, I want more people to see this amazing artist. He seemed to ponder for a moment, gazed at the painting for a while, and finally left with a smile. I knew Mr. Hurst's temperament. He is well known for cherishing talents and has discovered many unknown young painters in the past, some of whom had now become industry giants. I knew this was Anna's big chance. Things went much smoother than I had anticipated. I believe talented people are destined to have their day in the sun. I was genuinely happy for Anna. She was one step closer to her dream. On our wedding anniversary, I lied to Anna that I couldn't come back from France, intending to surprise her. But her reaction was rather indifferent. She simply said, "Got it." At first, I felt a little sad. But when I boarded the plane, I saw her post on social media. "Miss you across mountains and seas." The knot in my heart was immediately undone, and on the way back, I even started imagining our beautiful future together. How ironic, it turned out her longing had already been given to someone else. "Don't you feel any resentment?" Marcus asked me. I answered calmly, "Of course I do, but what's more important now is living my own life well." He sighed in relief and said, "George, sometimes you're so rational, it's terrifying." I smiled and said, "Thanks for the compliment." After hanging up, the surroundings grew quiet. I opened that video again. Anna smiled gently and affectionately in front of the camera, saying that the boy was the love of her life. It still made me uncomfortable deep down. I called Anna and told her that the income from the art exhibition counted as premarital property, and if we divorced, it should belong to me. She mocked me briefly but agreed. It seemed she was really in a hurry to marry her true love. I tried to convince myself that the trip to France was an investment. Now, I had made a substantial profit, so it wasn't a total loss. With that thought, I gradually made peace with myself. Money really is a good thing. That night, I treated myself to the best wine and drank until late. The next morning, I was woken up by a phone call. Marcus's voice sounded distant, then close. "Open the door." I staggered outside, opened the door, and saw him standing there with luggage, wearing a frown. "You go through all this and don't tell me?" I froze. He spread his arms and smiled at me. "I'm here to keep you company." I hugged him, touched. "You really are a good friend." But as it turned out, I was moved too soon. For a man about to divorce, a man in the throes of love was like poison. That night, I waited for him to join the gaming. He took a long time to reluctantly end his video call with his girlfriend. I grabbed him by the neck and said angrily, "Isn't this a bit much in front of me?" He grinned shamelessly. "This is called fighting fire with fire." I actually admired him. Despite the deep wounds he'd once suffered, he still lived so carefree. "Do you regret loving Becky?" The moment the question left my mouth, I regretted it. Upon hearing her name, Marcus didn't show much emotion. He just said, "A relationship doesn't have to be a tragedy just because the ending isn't ideal." I thought carefully about what he said. I think I don't need to resent the Anna of 28 for the one from 18. The girl who once dazzled time is simply no longer here. I'll accept it and slowly let go. A month later, Anna and I obtained our divorce certificate. I bought a vineyard in Montmartre, Paris, planning to go to France and learn winemaking. Marcus had already settled there and welcomed me to join him. On the day I left for abroad, Anna and Henry held a grand wedding. The bride wore a custom-made wedding dress, adorned with jewels. I remembered how poor we were when we got married. I had only bought a $200 white dress for the wedding, and the bouquet was made from a cotton tree flower picked by the roadside, simple and humble, just like the love we had back then. The past faded with the wind, like drifting clouds. Things had changed, and so had people. I boarded the plane, heading toward a new life. My life gradually became calmer. I thought I would never cross paths with Anna again. But a year later, when I went to visit my mother, we met again. Anna was holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in front of my mother's grave. When she saw me, there was a brief flash of surprise, and she hoarsely called out, "George." I asked coldly, "What are you doing here?" She took a few steps closer and hurriedly replied, "I thought I might run into you. You sold the house and changed your phone number, and I couldn't find you anywhere." I pulled away from her, coldly asking, "Do you need something?" The mountain breeze blew some fine sand, and her eyes seemed to redden slightly, as if the wind had stung them. "I just wanted to talk to you," she answered. I couldn't help but think it was the biggest joke. "Anna, you're married now. Let's go." Don't be in the way in front of my parents' graves. She ignored me and stood still. I couldn't get her to leave, so I simply ignored her. I want to explain what happened the night your mother passed away, Anna continued speaking, not caring if I wanted to listen. She said, I was planning to leave, but he stopped me, and I accidentally caused a miscarriage. I gave a nonchalant response, oh. Her head hung low. And her voice became sorrowful. George, I miscarried that night. My hand, which had been placing the offerings, froze for a moment, but I still didn't say a word to her. After a while, she spoke again, if I had come that night, would you still hate me this much? I looked up and met her eyes. The sadness in them was unmistakable. I didn't understand why she was still showing me this expression. I quickly looked away, pretending I hadn't seen anything, and began reporting to my parents about my life, telling them that I was doing very well now. After the memorial, Anna continued to follow me, talking more than usual. She said we used to come here together to see the flowers on the hillside, the birds in the forest, the clouds in the sky. She remembered everything. But Anna, the flowers on the hillside no longer bloom, the birds in the forest have flown away, and even the clouds in the sky are no longer the same shape. Everything has changed. The house back home had been left unattended for years and was uninhabitable, so after spending a night at a hotel in town, I flew straight back to France. Meeting Anna again didn't stir up too many emotions in me. Coincidentally, Marcus had started his own fashion design brand and became busy. My vineyard had hired staff, and I spent most of my time in the studio helping him. I joked, here we are, both with trade degrees, yet one sewing clothes and the others making wine, truly living a life of misdirection. He shook his finger. No, life is a process of gradually realizing who you truly are. While chatting, I asked him, when did you get interested in fashion design? He hesitated for a moment and answered softly, when you married Anna. He said there was something I never knew. Do you remember the outfits you wore at the wedding? The patterns were beautiful, but the price was ridiculously low. You always thought a friend of mine helped us out, right? I nodded. He continued, actually, Anna didn't want to spend the money. She bought the simplest white dress and suit. But not wanting you to feel like she was being cheap, she designed the patterns herself, consulted with my designer friend, and painstakingly embroidered them. She also made the veil herself. I didn't even know she could do needlework. She didn't at first, but my friend is really talented, and Anna's smart. She picked it up in just a few days. She didn't want you to feel guilty, so she didn't let me tell you. He said that at the time, he was just helping out, but when we put on the outfits, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Our thoughts drifted back to the past. He reminisced, on the wedding day, when you lifted Anna's veil and she saw your face. She was so moved that she cried. I still remember it. I chuckled bitterly, she really did love me back then. Marcus paused and then said, actually, a couple of days ago, I ran into Anna. I didn't react much and calmly said, Paris is the city of art. She's a painter, so it makes sense for her to be here. He shook his head. I think she came here to find you. That night, you left your things at my place, and when I went after you, I saw her following behind you, watching from a distance without approaching. I joked, I remember your night blind. Maybe you mistook her for someone else. Marcus angrily replied, I'm not blind. I even talked to her for a few minutes. I made sure to mention to her that you came to Paris to meet Mr. Hurst. We can't do good deeds and not take credit for them. I remembered that detail and gave him a thumbs up. Marcus sighed. After she heard it, she froze, looking completely lost, almost pitiful. I paused for a moment and said, it no longer concerns me. A particularly capable girl had come to work at my vineyard, and she took excellent care of the grapes. Thanks to her, the new batch of wine turned out to be of very high quality, and I received a big order. To my surprise, the clients hosting the banquet for which I had delivered the wine were all famous figures from the art world, including Anna. When I went to deliver the wine, I ran into her and Henry. Their relationship seemed strange, with little conversation between them. It didn't feel like a newlywed couple. I didn't linger and quickly signed the order before leaving. Anna noticed me and followed me out, though Henry didn't react much. In a rush, I hurried to leave. But Anna caught up to me and grabbed my hand. The moment our skin touched, she quickly let go, saying, sorry. Anna, what do you want? George, she stuttered, and I lost my patience. Suddenly, it seemed like she had an idea, and her previously dull eyes lit up. I want to paint a landscape of France. Could you be my guide? She quickly added, as if worried I might refuse, "I'll meet any conditions you set." I replied, "I don't need money." Her whole demeanor slumped, and with a tone almost pleading, she said, "George, can you give me a chance to make it up to you?" I looked at her coldly. "Make up for what? I know about Mr. Hurst." I answered calmly, "Being chosen by him is because of your own ability. I took your money, and we're even." Anna lowered her head, murmuring softly, "Why didn't you tell me back then?" I smiled. Would it have made any difference if I had? The sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. She stubbornly said, "Maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this." I felt only sarcasm. "Anna, wake up. We've been together for so many years. How many foolish things have I done for you? Back then. Your heart wasn't with me anymore. No matter what I said or did, it was in vain. Besides, I'm not interested in your sudden remorse." Maybe I had once imagined this kind of scene, where the heartless person suddenly wakes up, regretting their past actions. But when it actually happened, it didn't feel satisfying at all. How had the once dazzling girl turned into this version of herself? I paused, then said seriously, "Anna, stop making excuses for yourself. If you don't, I'll start looking down on you." Her body stiffened. Her face contorted with pain. "Go walk the path you chose." I turned away and didn't look back, leaving without a second glance. That night, Marcus was working overtime and asked me to bring him some food. It had already gotten dark. His studio was in a remote location, and 2 of the streetlights along the path were broken, leaving the entire alley dim and silent. Suddenly, 2 men with knives appeared from the side of the road, fiercely robbing me of all my belongings. I didn't have much money. But they rummaged through my bag and then shouted a few harsh words at me in French. Since their pronunciation was off, I couldn't understand much. Then they threw punches at me. We started struggling. In the chaos, a figure quickly rushed over and struck one of the assailants in the head with a stone. The armed thug, showing no mercy, retaliated and stabbed the other person twice before fleeing in panic. Everything happened too fast. By the time I realized what had just happened, I saw Anna collapsed on the ground, covered in blood. I rushed her to the hospital, where the doctor said she had been stabbed in the abdomen, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. However, her right hand had been injured, and it was feared she would never be able to paint again. She lay on the hospital bed, pale, and when she saw me, the first thing she did was ask if I was hurt. I shook my head, my brow furrowing more and more. She smiled faintly and tried to comfort me, "Don't worry, I'm not seriously hurt." I hesitated for a long time before finally telling her the truth. For a moment, the smile on Anna's face froze, and then she forced a cheerful expression. As if trying to convince herself, "It's okay. As long as you're fine." But she wasn't a good actress. She turned her face away, not wanting to look at me, her entire body trembling. I tried to comfort her. "The doctor didn't say there's no hope. Even if your right hand doesn't recover, you can try using your left hand. There will always be a way." She suddenly turned her head and, with red eyes, asked, "George, if Henry and I get divorced, I interrupted her, speaking plainly, "Anna. There will be no we anymore. Just focus on healing and don't think about anything else." Despair was clearly visible in her eyes. She looked at me with tears, pleading weakly, "At least tonight, can you not leave?" I replied calmly, "The one who can stay with you now is Henry, not me." But that night, Henry didn't show up, and in the end, I didn't leave. During her surgery, I used her phone to call Henry, but no one answered. Later, I sent him a message, but received no reply. In the middle of the night, she developed a low fever and vomited blood. The doctor re-examined her and said she had stomach cancer, but it wasn't in the late stages yet. With active treatment, she still had a chance of recovery. I didn't understand why, with money and status, she had allowed herself to fall to this point, but I didn't ask any questions. The next afternoon, Henry arrived, dressed impeccably and glowing with energy. He only asked the doctor if Anna's hand would ever be able to paint again, barely acknowledging my presence. I said my goodbye to Anna. "You focus on your treatment. I'm leaving." She didn't speak, lying in the bed, her eyes cold and lifeless. After Anna's right hand was rendered useless and she could no longer paint, the value of all her work soared. The news of the public auction of her work Muse, the piece that made her famous overnight, sparked intense discussion. Back then, Anna painted it to showcase love, and soon after, she married the male protagonist of the painting, a story that was once regarded as a romantic fairy tale by netizens. Because of this romantic backstory, the painting's value grew even higher. Eventually, a collector bought it for a staggering $50 million. But just days later, things took an unexpected turn. #Henry sells fake paintings. #Anna's affair during marriage. Both of these topics hit the headlines. Anna held a press conference, publicly stating that the original Muse had been destroyed long ago, and that the one being sold was a fake, forged by Henry. She admitted in front of the cameras that the romantic tale behind Muse was actually a scandalous extramarital affair. And that she had abandoned her husband of 10 years at the height of her success. The internet exploded. Netizens began to angrily denounce the deceitful woman and her shameless lover. Thanks to Anna's revelations, the police intervened to investigate the sale of the fake paintings. Before long, Henry was arrested on charges of producing and selling counterfeit goods. Given the massive sum involved, he faced a potential life sentence. After that, Anna disappeared from the public eye. My life went on like grass growing on the banks of a river, leaves sprouting on treetops, peaceful and content. With the years passing in quiet tranquility. The winery business thrived, and 6 months later, I met an eccentric customer, a 16-year-old French girl, who came to buy wine every few days, specifically requesting the wine I had personally made, and she had a special request each time. She asked me to teach her English. Each time, she would carefully record what I said on a voice recorder, starting with simple greetings like good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and sometimes other phrases. On Valentine's Day, she came again to buy wine, asking me to record I love you. By then, I had entered a new relationship with the girl who took care of my vineyard. After I recorded I love you for the customer, she suddenly leaned in and added, I love you too. I gently patted her head and turned around and apologized to the 16-year-old French girl, there's an extra line, hope that's okay. My girlfriend pursed her lips, seemingly conflicted, but in the end, said nothing, took the wine, and left. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. The other side was silent, with a long, prolonged pause. I assumed it was a wrong number. Just as my girlfriend called me to dinner, I hung up. After that, the girl never returned to my vineyard. Anna's name resurfaced in the public eye shortly after Valentine's Day. I stared at the trending topic #Anna's last work * for quite some time. The news reported that her body had been found at an old farmhouse in France, where she had lived in poverty and suffering from illness at the time of her death. The only item left behind was a painting titled Beloved, depicting a couple in wedding attire. The bride, holding a bouquet of kapok flowers, was gently embraced by the groom. Their faces were obscured by veils, making them impossible to see clearly. Industry experts unanimously agreed that it was Anna's finest work. Netizens were more focused on whether the painter was reminiscing about a past lover or had found a new soulmate. I gazed at the kapok flowers in the bride's hands, and my memories drifted back in time. The year Anna and I married, the kapok flowers bloomed early. I picked some and tied them together with a ribbon. She asked me, why not roses? I smiled mysteriously and said, because I like the symbolism of kapok flowers.
I married the boy I first liked when I was young, the one I promised to stay with for a lifetime, growing old together. Life after marriage, though modest, was still sweet. When did things start to go wrong? Looking back now, it must have been when we lost our first child. That was the first time I truly felt the helplessness of life. After that, he worked even harder, calculating every penny, his mind and eyes consumed with money. My paintings weren't selling. So he took another route and used his connections to help me find commercial commissions. It felt like a mandatory school essay, just paint according to the client's needs. Each piece lacked my own soul and thoughts. All I cared about was whether they were satisfied. I didn't like it, but it was an opportunity he fought for, so I should appreciate it. Our life did improve bit by bit. I thought as long as we had enough money, that was fine, but he was never content. Every day he ran around in a frantic race, even too busy to speak to me much. He would introduce business associates to me, smoothly raising a toast to them. Let's all do business together in the future. Those people, out of courtesy, would buy my paintings for high prices and then joke, Miss Anna married a good man. Honestly, I hated his obsequious attitude. I started to feel suffocated, even growing disgusted with my own paintings. Later, I met Henry. He quietly watched me paint, reminding me of George back then. He understood me and appreciated my art, not just focused on whether it could fetch a good price. My bleak days suddenly had a splash of color, and I gradually regained my vitality and the passion for painting. I admit, I couldn't suppress my feelings. I thought, this pure, innocent young man was the one destined to be my lover. And George and I, from the very beginning, were a mistake. On our 6th wedding anniversary, George discovered our affair, and I made my decision. After leaving George, I felt light and free. What surprised me even more was that my idol, Mr. Hurst, reached out to me, wanting to meet. He told me that he had seen my painting by chance at a street stall in France and admired my talent. The piece was a painting of a simple mountain village, with a young boy standing on the hillside. Though only his back was visible, it was vivid enough. That was a painting I had made at 18, a gift for George. Back then, he cherished it like treasure. But now, perhaps when he was short on money, he hastily sold it. That's just how he is. Money mattered more than feelings. It didn't matter anymore. We were about to divorce. With Mr. Hurst's guidance, I was able to successfully hold an exhibition. I succeeded, though George had made sure I wouldn't get a penny during the divorce. Making money was now easy for me. I married my true love in a grand ceremony. I thought, this was the life I wanted. But things started to get strange. I began to dream of George often. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and, seeing the man beside me, I would feel an overwhelming sense of unrealness, my heart empty. I began to pour myself into my art, locking myself in the studio all day. I used to do this too. And George would prepare 3 meals for me, even calling me when he was away on business to make sure I ate and slept on time. But Henry didn't care about those things. After we married, he rarely spent time discussing my paintings with me. Whenever I expressed even the slightest complaint, he would slam the door and leave. I began to uncontrollably miss George. When I ate at a fancy restaurant with Henry, I would think back to the days when he and I were squeezed into a rented apartment, sharing a single hamburger. When I bought Henry all sorts of expensive gifts, I would remember our first wedding anniversary, when George secretly saved up for a long time to buy me a Dior lipstick and an Estee Lauder skincare set. I scolded him for wasting money, but I was moved to tears. Then I remembered, during the divorce, I called him a man who only cared about money. The thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. Out of sheer impulse, I called George, but the number was no longer in service. I secretly went back to our old home, but it had new owners now. I watched a happy family inside, and for a moment, I wondered if I had lost the happiness that was within my grasp. I quickly shook my head and pushed that thought away. I reminded myself that my choices were right and could not be wrong. So I doubled my efforts to be good to Henry. But life is cruelly ironic. Henry cheated on me. The real him was so different from what I had imagined. He would send sultry pictures to other women in the middle of the night, calling them endearing names. George, this is what it feels like to be betrayed. I was so bad back then. Henry threatened me, saying that if I divorced him, he would make my life a living hell. I couldn't fight back. After 1 year of marriage, our life felt like we had entered a grave. I often return to George's hometown. No matter where he is, he always comes back here. Maybe one day I'll run into him. Once we really did meet again. He looked great, full of energy and vitality. After leaving me, he was doing well. He mentioned his vineyard in France while standing by his parents' grave, and I made a mental note of it. I started flying to France frequently, just to catch a glimpse of him. One time, I ran into Marcus after many years, and I learned a truth. Behind my success was his unreserved, wholehearted support. He hadn't changed, but I had. Over time, I forgot the love and promises we once shared. I had once truly experienced the best kind of love, but I lost it. This realization tore at my heart. I finally decided to divorce Henry, but he demanded 10 times more money than George had ever asked for. I agreed, but I needed some time. We were invited together to an art exhibition in France, and at the dinner, I unexpectedly ran into George. I couldn't control myself. I wanted to get closer to him. That night, he was attacked, and without thinking, I rushed to save him. He took me to the hospital and still worried about me. How wonderful. If losing a hand could bring George back, I wouldn't complain for a second. But he didn't want to give me that chance. God knows how badly I wanted to hold on to him when he left. But he left so quickly, and in the instant he turned away, not even a sleeve could I grab. I think this must be my punishment. In the future, he will meet someone 1,000 times better than me, and I will never meet anyone better than him. After returning to the country, I fell ill for a long time. During my hospital stay, Henry never came to visit me even once. Soon, I received the news that Muse had been sold at a high price at an auction, but that painting had been destroyed by me long ago. The only explanation was that someone had forged it. I went home to confront Henry, but instead of finding him, I saw a man and a woman tangled up in the room. It turned out that our marriage was even more disgraceful than I had imagined. Henry had a girlfriend of many years who had fallen into bad habits and owed a large sum of high-interest loans. He married me only for the money. He made a deal with me. My right hand was useless now, effectively taking away my means of making money. If I stayed silent, the proceeds from selling my paintings would be split evenly. Henry told me he truly loved the girl, but her debts were so large that if she didn't pay them, she would die. It seemed he had a heart, but it was set on someone else. He was even willing to take risks for her. So despicable yet pitiful. I held a press conference, and both he and I had to pay for our actions. On the day of his sentencing, we divorced. By then, he had emptied my assets, and I was left with nothing once again. I started trying to paint with my left hand. The quality of my work was nowhere near what it once was, but if I left them by the roadside, I could still sell a few. I saved up for 6 months to gather enough money to go to France. The doctor told me my stomach cancer was at an advanced stage, and I didn't have long to live. If I could, I wanted to be close to him when death came. I rented an old farmhouse near George's vineyard, and next door, there lived a kind couple with a lovely daughter. I often asked her to buy wine for me from George's vineyard, recording a phrase for me each time. I really just wanted to hear his voice. The wine he made was my medicine. In drunkenness, I could momentarily forget the heart-wrenching pain. I often dreamed of George. He would be dressed in a crisp suit, looking at me gently saying, "Anna, we're married." When I woke up, the unbearable longing would begin to torment me again, and I poured all of it into my paintings. I realized that even with my left hand, I could still draw George well, because, when I was young, I had drawn his features countless times. I painted myself beside him and named the painting True Love. But George's eyes, they stared at me so intently, it made me uneasy. He must have hated those words. I used oil paint to cover our faces with a veil, selfishly adding those 2 words onto the painting. If there's an afterlife, I will never let go of your hand. I curled up beside the painting, letting loneliness and despair consume me. Soon it was Valentine's Day, and my body had reached its limit. I realized I was close to death. At times like this, I should be allowed to indulge a little, right? I asked the girl next door to help me record a phrase. "I love you." But she told me it didn't record properly, and I felt so regretful. That night, I couldn't resist calling George. What should I say? I hadn't even prepared what to say when I heard a woman's voice on the other end. She called his name sweetly, and George responded with a tone full of affection. That was the sound of love, a sound I was once most familiar with. I understood then. I had completely lost him. He hung up the phone directly, and I vomited blood. As darkness engulfed me, I saw the bride in the painting lift her veil and look at her groom. She held a branch of kapok flowers in her hand and asked, "Why isn't it roses?" He smiled mysteriously and replied, "Because I love the meaning of kapok flowers." I suddenly remembered. I had told George before. I loved kapok flowers because their meaning represented the wisdom of love. Treasure the people around you and the happiness before your eyes.